Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
We assume that's the Bahamas. 544 miles per hour, 46, 56 degrees.
Well, good evening to you all. I'd like to thank Alexis for inviting me to be here this evening. It is an honor and a pleasure. I hope that it doesn't come as too much of a disappointment to you all, but the movie is not really to do with the number pi tonight, okay? The number pi is used to denote a mysterious mathematical object in which we seek a pattern when one doesn't obviously exist. And that will be a theme throughout the movie. But I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the number pi because it's something that's fascinated mathematicians for over 2,000 years. The reason being that, well, it's part of the formula for the area of a circle. We know that the area is pi r squared. And we know that the circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter. So it plays an important role in familiar objects such as that of a circle. And so if you look at the handout that I've passed around, the first page talks about how we've approximated pi over the millennia. And to begin with, people like Archimedes would take a triangle and put it inside and outside a circle and gain an approximation for the number pi. And you can see from the figure at the bottom of the first page that this approximation gets better as you increase the number of sides that your shape has. So you start with a triangle, you increase it to a square, you move it on to a pentagon, a hexagon, and you get better and better approximations. And we use those figures, the triangle, the square, etc., because we know what the area of those is, and so we just move up the number of sides and we get a better approximation. So at the top of the second page, I say that Archimedes stopped, before he was killed, with a 96-sided figure, and from that he obtained a very accurate approximation for pi. But this didn't stop with his death. It continued for centuries and still continues today, and the approximation for pi has got better and better. And if you read through the second page, you see that many people were involved with this, many different nationalities, to the point where today, using supercomputers, we can approximate pi to 1 trillion digits and beyond. So just to give you one interesting story involving the history of pi, in 1896, the amateur mathematician Dr. Goodwin tried to introduce a bill in the state of Indiana which essentially said that the value of pi was exactly 3.2. Well, anyone with any mathematical training should be skeptical of that, and certainly a professor at Purdue University, his name was Dr. Waldo, came across this bill and said, well, this is complete nonsense. But by this time, the bill had passed the House in the state of Indiana and came close to passing through the Senate as well until Dr. Waldo intervened. So the bill was eventually axed, and at that time, Dr. Waldo was asked, well, would you like to meet Dr. Goodwin to talk it over with him? And Dr. Waldo said, no, I already know as many crazy people as I care to. So that's one amusing anecdote about pi, and I will come back after the movie and talk more about mathematical patterns, and that's really the theme of tonight's movie. Thank you.
Wow, that took a while to process. My name is Rabbi Sholom Dubov. I run an organization in Orlando called Chabad, which is a Jewish outreach, but it reaches way beyond the Jewish community. It reaches every facet of life in Central Florida. But I'm here tonight as a guest of Alexis to discuss the mystical dimension of the movie, Kabbalah, as it is used and referred to by many. And in creation, there are no squares. Think of anything that's been created, that's natural. There are no squares, no polygons. Everything is circular or various shapes. So to get from a circular to a straight line, we have to use mathematics. The origin of mathematics, the origin of numbers, existed before the world was created. We refer to them as the Hebrew alphabet. Every letter of the alphabet has a numerical value. In fact, every object in creation, from the first step of creation all the way through today, every particle of light, every atom, every subatomic particle, every part of matter or energy is connected to a number. Understanding the number gives us better and deeper understanding into our own life and adds value and substance. One of the points of the movie is that this person searches for that mystical, unknown number. And we'll discuss after the movie some of the Kabbalistic truths and falsehoods, some of the myths associated with the understanding of that number and how we reach it, and how I personally apply some of those concepts in my life today. Thank you, Alexis, for this opportunity. And Alexis wanted to say a few words.
Hello. Thank you guys for coming to the National Science on Screen evening for this wonderful screening of Pi. I am Matt Kennedy. I am the development coordinator working with Alexis here at Enzian. It is my privilege to introduce to you guys Rabbi Sholom Dubov, who will be giving us a wonderful speech on I will let him tell everybody about what he is about to speak. So please give him a round of applause, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And no, it's not going to be a speech. So what I put out on the board over here is the 22 Hebrew characters of the alphabet, and each one of them, each letter represents a number. So when we say a word in Hebrew, we literally sound the word, but what isn't sounded is the numerical value of that specific word. Now, if we take a sentence, a word, a paragraph, an entire subject, and every single one of those letters, every single one of those words, every character has a numerical value, you could begin to imagine how a person could literally go in all different tangents with these numbers. And to me, that's one of the underlying tones of the movie, where the person literally goes crazy with the numbers in his head. So part of the teaching of Kabbalah or mysticism is to ground yourself, to take these numbers, to take these concepts, and then to live in the real, practical world. One of the things mentioned in the movie was the fact that the holiest person went into the holiest room on the holiest day. It's interesting that from a Jewish law perspective, the person chosen to lead the entire nation on the holiest day with the holiest ritual had to be married. It's one of the laws. In fact, that law was so specific that there was an assistant that was prepared just in case the person's spouse passed away prior to the service. During the service, he would be disqualified and a replacement would be in his stead. The question is why? Why would such a person need to be married? So the simple answer is, if he's praying and pleading on behalf of the entire nation for material, physical needs, how can he understand physical and material needs if he's not married, doesn't have a family, doesn't have a requirement to deal with the necessities of the financials and the physical of life? But on a deeper level, one of the things that Judaism rejected is the notion that to be holy and to be spiritual and to be godly, you have to remove yourself from the world. So they practiced in some cults celibacy, where they would not come in contact with someone from the opposite gender. They practiced fasting, where they would refrain from eating for a day or 2 days or even 3 days. They had rituals where they would try to stay awake for as long as possible so they shouldn't fall asleep. And these were all things which contradicted living a normal, healthy, happy life. So one of the concepts of the person being married is that he was a real person that had a real family, and he was grounding all these spiritual concepts into a practical daily life. He didn't drug himself. He didn't walk into some mountain or some ashram or some ivory tower. He made the teachings of the most sublime and the most spiritual very practical, very real, and very personal. Can we get to the next slide? Everybody left? Okay. Thank you. Oh, I'm the one who's supposed to do it. Okay. See, you have to be practical. All right. What happens when we press it? Is it on? No, it isn't. There you go. Okay. So, this is a image of the first 3 columns of a Torah, of an original manuscript of the biblical text. Now, every synagogue in the entire world, from the most liberal to the most observant, from the least practicing to the most orthodox, are all going to have identical scrolls in the synagogue. They may practice different, they may believe different, they may look different, they may act different, but every synagogue in the entire world has a similar image of this, of a Torah. Now, each letter has to be separated from the letter before it or afterwards. There are a specific amount of columns that are allowed to be in every Torah, 246 to be exact. If there's one less or one more, it's not kosher. And the letters have to be written in a certain pattern. And the spacing is of a specific requirement. Between each column, before the column, above the column, and so on. So the scroll actually is a code for all the information that exists not only in the biblical text, but also throughout history of the entire world. This is an image of the basic DNA of creation from Kabbalah. In order for anything to exist, it has to have all these 10 components. Of course, tonight is not the opportunity and the time to go through in detail of all the aspects, but just suffice it to say that these 10 building blocks of creation is the DNA that exists within everything. We have the inanimate life, which is the rocks and the stones and the physical nature. We have the plant life, which is trees, plants, flowers. We have the animal life, which is everything that perambulates, anything that moves. And then we have the human life. These 4 dimensions are all created with these 10 components. Basically, the top 3 are intellect. The bottom 7 are emotion. Each of these components exists throughout the entire pattern of creation. When we come up with a number like 216, it's actually the Hebrew letter of God's name. The name that God is given in the Bible, in the Torah, is only a description of a manifestation of Him. Think of a name for yourself. Why do you need a name? You only need a name in order for someone else to identify you. If you lived alone, you watched the movie Castaway, no one ever called him. He never called anybody. There's no need to use a name if you're living alone. So when God exists outside of creation, there is no name. No need for a name. When He is a creator, He has to be defined by the creation. And therefore, a name is given. In the Bible, in the Torah, 7 names of God are given. One of the names of God, which is the letter Shin, Daled, Yud, which the numerical value is 314, is 3.14. Interesting number and relates to pi. So these are not coincidences. These are not just random numbers that come together. There's a pattern within everything. And one of the things we do when we study mysticism is to try to relate these concepts that are very sublime and very mystical to the very practical DNA of creation. So in the names of God, the basic name of God as it's written in the Torah, is written in the original Bible, is a 4-letter name of God. We said there's a numerical value of the letter. So the numerical value of these 4 letters equals 26. The Yud, which is the 10th letter, is the number 10. The Hey is the 5th letter, it's the number 5. The Vav is the 6th letter, is number 6. The last Hey is another 5. 10, 5, 6, 5 equals 26. Each letter is pronounced in order to make the letter sound audible. So if I want to say, for example, the word Yud, which is the first letter, I have to use other letters to pronounce those letters. So if we add all these hidden letters, we come up to 72. And 72 times 3 is the 216 that refers to in this movie. So it's very interesting. The movie takes it off on a tangent where these rabbis are trying to find this guy and trying to get the number. The practical part of it is that there really isn't this searching this guy and running through train tracks and running over bridges to capture the guy and steal the numbers from him. This is a personal discovery that each person studies and learns and applies the concepts to their own life. And we would entertain any questions that you may have afterwards, after Dr. Who speaks over here on the mathematical side of it, will be able to sit together and answer any questions that you may have. And I want to thank Alexis for the opportunity to give me this forum tonight to speak. Thank you so much, Doctor.
As Alexis mentioned earlier, some of my current and former students are here this evening, and I'm grateful to them for their presence. I I'm not sure I would want all of my students here to watch that movie, though. I'm not sure it's the greatest recruiting tool for the subject of mathematics. But it does point to some things that are very true, that mathematics is the science of patterns. And that's what Max was looking for in the movie, was patterns in the stock market and also, at one point, patterns in the value of pi. But as Rabbi Dubov alluded to, we have to be careful to distinguish between patterns and coincidences. And that's what I talk about in the third page of the handout that many of you received at the beginning of the evening. I'll give you two examples. Our board has just magically appeared. I'll give you two examples, one of which is what looks to be a pattern, but is actually just a coincidence. And then the second, which I think you'll find more interesting, may look like a coincidence, but is in fact a pattern. And so the first example, and this is in the handout, talks about the polynomial n squared plus n plus 40. I think I've got that right. 41, yes. So if you start substituting in numbers for n here, so when n equals 1, you get 1 squared plus 1 plus 41, you get 43. And 43 is a prime number. You try n equals 2, and you get 4 plus 2 plus 41, you get 47, and that's also a prime number. You can continue this with n equals 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 40, and you get a prime number every time. And so at that point, a lot of people will get lazy and say, well, it works for the first 40 numbers, it must work for them all. Well, that's not true. When you plug in n equals 41, it turns out that this number is not prime, it's divisible by 41. And so it was really just a coincidence that this pattern occurred for the first 40 numbers. It's not true in general at all. And so the science of mathematics looks for things that are true in general and for patterns that continue up to infinity. So there's an example of something that appears to be a pattern but is really just a coincidence. Let me give you an example of something that you may think is coincidental but actually turns out to be true in general. And so this is interactive on your part. So I've counted there are around sort of 70 or 80 of you in the room, and I'm willing to bet that 2 of you share a birthday. Okay? So this is a well-known problem in mathematics called the birthday problem. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you were born in January. Some of you may have to shout here. So we've got how many hands up? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 January birthdays. So what date in January were you born?
30th.
The 30th. You, sir?
4th.
The 4th. Anyone else in January? Yes. The 9th? 7th. The 7th. Anyone else in January? The 8th. That's all the January birthdays? So we didn't find a match. Okay? So we move on. We move on to February. Raise your hand if you were born in February. I see 5 hands, up 6 hands. You, sir?
4th.
The 4th. The 19th. The 6th. Ma'am? The 8th. The 1st. All different, right? So we continue. I'm getting a bit nervous now. So we move on to March. Any March birthdays? Quite a number. They're all congregated in the center, it seems. We've got 2 at the front, though. You're not twins, are you? No. So when's your birthday? 24th? 29th? 27th? 12th? 10th? All different? All done? Oh, not looking good, is it? April. Right, we've got 5 hands, I believe, maybe 6. 14th? 23? 8th? 7th? 4th? Was that? No, that wasn't said? No? Anyone else in April? 8th. Didn't somebody say the 8th? Anyone else say the 8th of April? Yes, I found a match. Okay? So, 2 people have the same birthday, April 8th. And you might say, what a remarkable coincidence. No, that's worked every time I've done it. Okay? The probability that 2 of you shared a birthday, 80 people in the room, was 99.999%. Okay? I would have been astonished if I'd have gone through the whole year and not found a match. The mathematics behind that is too complicated for me to describe in a couple of minutes, but there's something where you think, well, that was just a coincidence. 2 birthdays, April the 8th? No, that was not a coincidence, okay? That was as a result of sound mathematical principles that are taught in a probability class at UCF and at all colleges. So mathematics and mathematicians have to distinguish between what is a coincidence and what truly is a pattern that is supported by logical reasoning, by mathematical facts. And so that's something that I do at UCF. I'm teaching a logic class this semester, and that's something that mathematics prides itself on, really. And if you read the 4th and final page of the handout, the moral of the tale is that mathematics is by no means a dead subject. We've stopped looking really for patterns in pi because if you look at the last page, we found some. We've found patterns already, and so maybe the movie, the guy Saul who has a second stroke and dies because he comes too close to finding the pattern, I would say that's not realistic. We found patterns in pi. We'll probably find more as time goes on, but mathematics by itself will not kill you, even though some of my students may beg to differ. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.
All right, well, we want to give you guys a chance to speak back and ask some questions of our wonderful guests. So we have a town hall mic right over here with Ethan by the doors. If you guys want to go ahead and line up so you can ask your questions, we'll have a couple chairs up here for our guests to speak back to. Here's your mic. It is on, so you can go ahead and speak anytime. And here's your microphone.
All right, we'll take questions from the audience. I'm more than glad to answer any questions you may have. Yes?
My question was for the UCF professor. In that pattern, you said that it wasn't a pattern because it only worked for 40 digits.
Yes.
But if pi is infinite, then how can you know that any of the patterns you've seen are in fact patterns if you don't know if it holds true for all of pi because no one's ever seen all of pi, if it's an infinite number?
This, as I mentioned, is just a coincidence rather than a pattern. But if you allude to pi, and it's still on the screen there, it looks as if there is no pattern. You can't look at that and see a pattern. But if you look at my handout on the back page, I do mention a very discernible pattern that you can look at if you continue what's called the continued fraction. Again, I can't discuss discontinued fractions in a couple of minutes, but if you go to Wikipedia or a suitable source online, you can see that patterns do emerge that will continue indefinitely. These are things that have been proven mathematically.
Oh yeah, that was just my question, is like, how do you know it will work indefinitely if pi is naturally infinite? You know what I mean? Like, it might be semantic, but it's like...
That's a good question. How do you prove something when there are infinitely many cases?
Right, yeah.
And in a class such as my mathematical logic class that I'm teaching now, I teach techniques for proving that things are true for infinitely many cases without having to write them out, which would be impossible. So there are methods such as mathematical induction, where you prove that something is true for infinitely many cases in a relatively short space of time. So we do have techniques for doing that.
Okay, that's really cool.
If you didn't get my handout, that's why I wrote my email address on the board. You can write to me, and I will attach the handout in response.
Since I guess I'm like the dude who's asking questions, I had a question for the rabbi as well, which is like, how accurate is the idea that the Torah has like maybe a mathematical significance hidden in it?
Mathematics, like all other sciences, are part of the creation process. The source of the entire world comes from a God that's infinite and therefore not limited to any rules of nature, any rules of physics. In fact, he created the rules of physics and nature and numbers. So he exists beyond numbers, beyond time, beyond space. However, he created a world that functions within the realms of time and space. So the Torah, according to Kabbalah, existed before the world came into being. In fact, it's called the blueprint for creation. The blueprint is a form, a pattern that's designed by the architect before the building even comes into existence. So if you have an idea, you have a prototype, you want to build something, first you have to make a blueprint of how you want it to look, how it should be described, how it should be created, how it should be formed. And then from that blueprint comes the project. So people think that first came the world, and then came the understanding about how the world exists. And therefore we need to go to mysticism or spirituality or godliness or the soul to be able to explain how the world came into existence. The opposite is true from a Kabbalistic perspective. First came the design, first came the blueprint, then from the blueprint came the world. So the world was designed according to the plan that the blueprint had already been set forth. And that existed before the world was created. So the Torah, according to the mystic, isn't a pattern of how the world exists. It's actually the code that created the world. And therefore, everything in the world has to be conforming to the rules, if you will, to the structure of the Torah. So we look at the Torah for the guidance, for the answers to how the thing exists. This answers also another question, how the Jewish people were able to survive under so much oppression, under so much difficulties and persecution throughout the ages. And people think, well, the Jewish people are wise, the Jewish people are smart. It has nothing to do with our wisdom. It has nothing to do with our genius. It has nothing to do with our devotion or willingness to survive. It has to do with the fact that we are connected to a Torah that's higher than time, higher than space, and by accessing the source material, if you will, then we are guaranteed to survive as long as we are connected to what's called the tree of life.
Cool. All right. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Hi. My question's for the rabbi. Is there any other, is it just the first 5 books, the Torah, or is there any other relation in the other books of the Old Testament or New Testament or anything like that?
Great question. So in the worthiness or value of the letter of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as it's called, are the holiest and highest. That means every letter and every word and every sentence and every paragraph has a specific order and structure, and that you will find uniform in all synagogues around the world as long as they existed. In fact, there was a scientific study done 30 or 40 years ago which challenged the validity of the Torah by saying that it was written by people and copied by people over the millennia, and it's not possible there shouldn't be human error. So this book was basically written in the early 50s or late 40s about that the Torah isn't as reliable as people think it is. And then this group of Arab kids are playing in a cave in Israel, in a city called Qumran. And they come up with these clay pots. And they open these clay pots and look like scrolls inside. So they were smart enough to bring it to their leader or to the people in charge, which understood that these were ancient manuscripts. It turned out we call them today the Dead Sea Scrolls, because Qumran is a city right near the Dead Sea. And these clay pots had original manuscripts that were 2,000 years old. The way they were preserved is they would put these scrolls, which were skins of animal. Even today, till today, a Torah is written, only is allowed to be written on the skin of an animal. It's called parchment. And there's a special process by which that hide of the skin is treated so you'll be able to write on it. As we all know, it's a living organism, and after a period of time, it just disintegrates. So they used to put these scrolls in clay pots and then seal it with clay. So basically was the closest thing to a hermetically sealed, oxygen-proof container. And after all these years, it was preserved. They open up the scroll, and it's identical to the Torah that we have today in synagogues all over the world. Why is it that way? Because according to Jewish law, you cannot write a Torah unless you have a previously edited, written Torah in front of you that you copy word for word. In fact, it's not allowed to be written by memory. Even though the scholar knows the entire text by heart, he still has to write it word by word, matching the words of the sentence that's written to the new parchment on the page. So the first 5 books retain the holiest value, if you will, the holiest importance. And then the other 19 books of the Jewish Bible, known as the Tanakh, are lesser value in terms of their holiness, in terms of their prophecy, if you will. And then we have the commentaries over the years that were written to explain them. So people who dedicated their lives selflessly, with no personal agenda and no personal interest, no personal gain to the interpretation of the Torah, we see those as sacred also. But they don't compare to the original 5, which is the image I put you on board, and that's till today written on the original parchment and used in synagogues around the world.
Hi, I have a question for both of you. Do you think mathematics is a real entity in itself, or it's just a human construct? Like, we know that time is a real entity as it's connected to space, but is mathematics real?
I believe it is, and I think the movie alluded to the fact that we have several mathematical patterns that appear in nature. And so I think that's proof of a sort that mathematics is there to be discovered. It's not necessarily just a man-made construct.
Very good. I'll give an answer from a different perspective. In the creation of the world, we mentioned before that God is infinite. Really, he's not even infinite. Infinite is a description. He doesn't fit into the description of infinity as well. But something that's greater than limitation created limitation. So that contradiction, how a being which is above creation could create, you need to have structure. Those were the 10 components we mentioned before. So there had to be physical descriptions to define those numbers. We call that today science or mathematics or physics, rules of nature. This is the way God utilized those things which he created to make nature. But he's not bound by them. when he does something that's not conforming to the confines of nature, we call that a miracle. And really a miracle is only something which is not a pattern, something we can't understand. The Jewish people leave Egypt, we go out of into the Exodus, and we come to the water, and the water is blocking us from going. Moses raised his staff in the second book of the Bible and splits the sea. And the Jewish people pass through, and the Egyptians follow, and then the sea covers over the Egyptians that pursued them. What exactly took place? What actually happened was that the walls, the physical dimensions of the water became solid for that period of time so the Jewish people could pass, and then reverted back to its water status that God created the water to flow to be able to function again as water. So God's not limited by the confines of any of the rules that he created. He did say that I created rules in the Psalm 146. He says, these are rules that shall never be changed. But when he chooses to go beyond the rules of nature, then we call that a miracle. So mathematics, as well as all other sciences, as physics, are for us to use within the dimensions of time and space, but not limited to those things just because we are functioning in that world. So when we need something that's miraculous, then we believe that something miraculous can happen. Just like the God who created nature could also create something and give us something that's beyond the limitation of nature. So to answer your question, mathematics is real, but it also is a part of the structure that he created that can also be overridden.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
See the line from up there. Hey, hi, Dr. Griffiths. Had you a few semesters ago. It's good to see you here. I didn't know you'd be here, but it's a pleasant surprise. I just had one quick question, mostly for the rabbi. He mentioned that the name of God, one of the names of God, was 314 in Hebrew. And I guess coming from a Christian background, I've heard like Alpha and Omega for God. And there's only ever been one numerical value for the devil. And I was wondering if there's any correlation with that number in Hebrew.
You mean 666?
Yeah.
Okay. That is a Christian concept. So I can't address a Christian concept. I'm not a scholar of Christianity. But I will just tell you from a Jewish perspective that numbers define a specific order that's being used for that time and that space. So when God is the creator of the world, which is the name that's used throughout the Bible, it's a four-letter name of God, which you mentioned before, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, that has the numerical value of 26. And the Hebrew meaning of that word means he was, he is, and he will be. And this doesn't mean that he was before the world, he is now, and he will be after time. It means that those three to him are happening at the same time. That he's not limited to the confines of time and space, even though he created a world that functions within time and space. So that's one letter of God's name. Another name of God, which is found also in the Bible very often, is called Elokim. And Elokim in Hebrew has the numerical value of 86. And that's the same numerical value of the word nature. In Hebrew, Hateva, which is nature, is the numerical value of 86. So those two things are combined. Why is sometimes God seen as above nature and sometimes seen as within nature? So one of the primary prayers that Jewish people say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." The Lord our God, the Lord is one. It just should have said, our God is one, indivisible. He's a single entity. The fact that we say, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, is implying that the same God that exists outside of time is also the same God that exists within time. So the purpose of a Jewish person living in the world is not just that we go to a synagogue, or we have certain rituals, or we have certain prayers, or we have a certain obligation to live a certain lifestyle, but in fact, our responsibility is to take nature and transform it to its godly source, to connect the above nature and within nature. So that's where the numbers are so important, because it shows that we are not functioning according to the rules of nature because they're dictated by someone or something, but they are in fact an opportunity for us to express our godliness in that way. And by the way, according to the Torah, this is not just for Jewish people, this is for all humanity. Because when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, He gave the Jewish people a mandate, a responsibility to transform the world and make the world holy. Not just for the Jewish people, but for what we called in the Torah the 70 nations, which are all people on the planet. And that time, God told the Jewish people that they should go out into the world and preach 7 principles of humanity. That if all people on the face of the earth follow these 7 basic principles, they sound like from the 10 Commandments, but they're really 7 unique principles that apply to all humanity. Every single person of every religion, of every race, creed, and color and gender can all follow these 7. The first is to believe in God. The second is not to curse God's name. The third is not to steal. The fourth is not to murder. The fifth is not to commit adultery. The sixth is not to act cruel to animals. And the seventh is to establish social order and justice wherever we are. Rules of how we get along with each other. So an example of that, a red light or a stop sign would be an example of the seventh, where there's no rule of how we should go, but there has to be a structure of who we let first and who we stop for to allow other people to go, so there can be a pattern of life that conforms to a healthy and proper way of living. So think about all the rules that were ever made by every religion. If we threw all the books out and we only followed these 7, what kind of amazing, what kind of precious, what kind of incredible world it would be. That we don't have to worry that if we left a wallet in the store, or if we left our car open and our phone was in the car, the iPad was on the seat, no one would steal it. And no one would be looking at our spouse and trying to steal her away or him away. Nobody would be looking to hurt us. There can never be murder if we follow these principles. And people respected a higher being and never cursed a higher being. We weren't cruel to animals. What kind of incredible world it would be. And sometimes I wonder, why do we make new rules and why do we make new regulations to try to make our lives happier and better when we could go back to these 7 cardinal principles of creation that God gave Adam and Eve and then Noah coming out of the ark. And this would be an incredible, peaceful, happy, and healthy world. So my hope tonight is that everyone would leave inspired to become a little better, a little happier, a little holier, and together make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
I can't comment on your specific question. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but you referred to the number 666, and one thing that I talk about in the handout is that you view the number 666 as 600s plus 60 plus 6. That's just based on decimal arithmetic that you've been taught from a very early age. Sure. There's no reason why you can't do arithmetic using what we call other bases. And in fact, many other civilizations have done just that. The Babylonians used base 60 arithmetic. The Mayans used base 20 arithmetic. In my notes, I mentioned how the number 96 in French is 96, which is 4 20s plus 16. So even in French, they use a base 20 counting system. In computer science, they use binary arithmetic, which is base 2. And so the number 666 only has significance if you consider decimal arithmetic. It's something completely different if you view it through the prism of another base system.
Excellent. Thank you both for being here tonight. I really appreciate your answers and your time spent. Thank you.
Do you have more questions? Sure, please.
All right, thanks. Whoa, that's loud.
I turned to a pumpkin at 1 a.m., so you have time.
Thanks, this is really great. Thanks for being here. So I've kind of wondered this question for a long time since I was a little watching different movies and things, and this is a perfect place to ask it. So since mathematics is considered a constant in this universe, it's been interpreted that it could be used as a language to communicate with other entities that we might not actually be able to share language with, be that spiritual or extraterrestrial. I'm just wondering if in either of your fields that concept has ever been explored, and if there's any kind of like strategies or different systems or way to show math and numbers without using, you know, the way that we write them, because obviously that's how we interpret it. But if we were trying to communicate with some type of otherworldly entity using mathematics, how would you do that?
I'm familiar that NASA sent a message into space that was designed for extraterrestrials and that it involved mathematics of some sort. But again, I would refer you to the answer I just gave, in the sense that the way we view numbers and the way we do arithmetic is very much dependent on the system that you choose. And so, you know, in the first and second grade, you learn to add and subtract and multiply base 10. But there's no reason why you couldn't do the arithmetic in other bases, and that's something that I teach in my number theory class. And so I would have to study that some more to see the message that was sent into space. But I would caution that mathematics and arithmetic in particular can be done in many different ways.
I would just add that from a Kabbalistic perspective, numbers can be manipulated. If you just think of any word that has a numerical value, which we mentioned before, and then you combine different words together and you come up with a new number, every one of those letters could be changed to have a different meaning and a different context. So one of the things that we're cautioned is that we shouldn't just take a number and define it as good or bad. There are no bad numbers and there are no good numbers. One of the things in Jewish mysticism is about dreams. So, like numbers, dreams can have a meaning. People wake up in the morning, they had a nightmare. Their house collapsed, or their most valuable asset was taken from them. And they go to the sage to ask, what is the meaning? And in most cases, the description of the actual vivid dream is not even close to the interpretation. It's usually the opposite. For example, one dream that's mentioned in mystical books about this guy that was in a tent, and the main pole of the tent fell and the entire tent fell in. And he woke up all nervous that he had the dream that his whole house collapsed. And the interpretation of the dream was that your main stability is going to get redefined and new opportunities will come into your life. So it's very important that we don't use numbers to come up with our own interpretations. We have to find the true source material and to be able to connect them to the right interpretation. And this takes a lot of study. This takes a lot of discipline, because the moment it becomes personal and it becomes used to our advantage, then we're losing focus and we lose the perspective. So generally speaking, mathematics is used to help us grow, to help us understand a greater perspective in life, rather than just using it for some kind of manipulative purposes for our own personal gain or personal benefit. And that's why mathematics is, like anything else, used in a context of understanding the greater purpose and the greater significance. So one of the rules of the Torah is that when the Torah says, for example, thou shalt not steal, there's no interpretation how you could end up stealing, justifying the numbers. If it says thou shalt not steal, it means literally, first and foremost, don't take something that doesn't belong to you. So we always have to stay true to the literal interpretation while we're trying to understand greater significance within the numbers. So there was the structure, the guidelines, the fences, if you will, are so important to ground us and to keep us real and practical in everything that we do. And we use the mystical numbers to justify and to enhance our life, but never for our own personal gain and to try to find interpretations that outside of the structure that was set for us.
Thank you.
How could someone here that maybe wants to reach out personally or maybe learn a little bit more about both of you guys, how would they do that?
Well, I would, first of all, there's a article on Pi, which I'll be more than glad to share with anybody if you want to email me. My email is Rabbi Dubov, R-A-B-B-I, D like David, U, B like boy, O, V like Victor, at mac.com. Yes, I'm a Mac person. So Rabbi Dubov at mac.com. You could just send me anytime an email. I'll be more than glad to answer your question. And we do have courses in Kabbalah that are available from time to time. And we're more than glad to accommodate any questions of anyone that has wants to further study the subject. And again, thank you so much for sharing the stage with me. And we should only be blessed. Those of you that are Jewish, holiday of Passover is coming up. I wish you a happy, healthy, and kosher Passover, and many, many opportunities of goodness for all of you. Thank you.
My email address is on the board there. It's my first name, Barry, at ucf.edu, and you're welcome to contact me with any mathematically related questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I want to thank you guys. Thank you, Dr. Barry. Thank you, Dr. Rabbi Dubov and Barry Griffiths. Thank you guys for coming this evening. Thank you for coming to the National Evening of Science on Screen, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Good night.